far this week? All right, seems like everyone's feeling okay with what we've got so far. Okay, let's jump into this then. Today we are covering a little bit more about how we use CSS to lay out a page. So there's a few concepts that we need to review regarding how the browsers interpret all of the tags that we've got in terms of that spacing, and then what tools we have that will allow us to reshape that interpretation from the browser. So let's talk a little bit about inline versus block versus inline block alignment. So if we look at our page from our dashboard here, we can see how all of these elements are just stacked one on top of the other. So if we hover over the H1, again, we're seeing it is basically a long row of information, and it's taking up that whole block. And the same thing with this image. And then there's a difference between the H1 and how the anchor tags are acting, and how the later elements in the main section of the cards, how the H2s are acting. You see how anchor tags are aligning all in a row. That's because anchor tags are by default called inline elements, whereas these other elements are called block elements. So by default, most HTML tags that get displayed to the browser are block elements, and they essentially have that devoted height and width takes up the entire page that we're dealing with. So in CSS, we can actually adjust, oops, I need to push that link. Reduce the size here. I'm going to close out this tab. So if we have our H1, the property that we're dealing with is called the display property. And we enter that in display and change this to inline. Save and refresh. Can you see that difference there? The employee is now on that same line with those anchor tags. There are other tags that are also by default inline. So we showed you, just make a new paragraph tag here. Some fake text here. We add in a p tag. It's a block display characteristic, and so it's been inserted in our flow here, just like the other ones were. It's filling up that whole horizontal space, and it's just stacked on top of each other. We showed you the strong tag. Add some text in there. Strong tags are also by default inline tags. The way that the browsers want to display these inline tags is basically eliminating the ability to adjust height or width, and it's just automatically shrinking to the space of the content itself. So if I were to try to add to my strong tag, just try an experiment here, a height, if we were to say 100 pixels, nothing changes in our display, even though we've tried to make a declaration, because of that display property that it already has automatically, which is inline, which means that the browser is trying to prevent us from manipulating that height and keeping it within text. And this is how a lot of things like anchor tags, which are commonly used inside of a paragraph text as just part of that text, those are things that by default we would naturally want to flow with the text as we read it. And so we don't want to have to break that apart. Now, if I wanted to change the display of an inline element like strong, I can do that to override that default behavior. So I can change it to block. And now this strong section becomes a block element that has that height that I've given it, those 100 pixels. And so we could manipulate it then at that point.
I have a quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
So the, I apologize for all the stuff happening, but the strong that you just adjusted to 100 pixels in height, say if that were more words, it would just be like this, a whole block of 100 pixels of text.
Right. So if I understand right, it would continue to just flow horizontally. So if I add a bunch of text in there, oops, too many quick keys. Okay, let's save there and refresh. It's just going to go across, but I can, because I've given it block qualities, I can also give it a width of 50 pixels, and then it will wrap within that space.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I want to show one other property, and we're going to take those properties back and then refresh this. Go back to our CSS, and we'll delete our paragraph that we added. Now I want to get a little closer to what our card HTML display should look like with the CSS. So I'm going to go back to our sketch file and copy some information about the card itself. I'll get, I think, copy the CSS attributes here. Go back to Visual Code and just paste that here. It's getting a lot of information about the text within there. I don't need. So we are going to go with this information. And what I want to do is assign each of these sections is assigned a class called card already. So coming back to our CSS, will someone remind me of how I'm going to add these CSS declarations to that class for the cards?
Dot card, squiggly line with everything and then close it out.
Okay, good. I'm going to tab that forward. So we're giving this CSS the background of white, and that's the hex code for white is FFFFF. And box shadow, that's referring to that drop shadow that we can see behind here. And that's how it's represented in CSS. So we have 3 pixel vertical offset and then 5 pixel blur. And then it's got a color of this RGBA color with the 0.2 that represents its opacity. So that gives us the see-through nature of it. And then a border radius is the rounded corners, and it's a 5 pixel rounded corner. So I'm going to go ahead and save that and then come back here and see what we get. You can barely see the edge of the drop shadow and the shape of the card. What's missing in this box based on your understanding of the box model that might help give these cards correct definition?
Margins.
Okay, margins.
Padding.
Anything else? Padding, yeah.
Maybe
exactly.
a box border.
And what was that?
A box border.
Okay, box border. Let's look at our design. The border that we see in this design is really a result of our box shadow, and so we wouldn't add a border to these cards, even though that's what it appears
box
like.
Shadow.
Yeah, so box shadow we have on there. So we'll add some padding, potentially some margin, and then maybe a width and height as well, or height. So let's look at this card and somewhere in here is our rectangle. And just looking at the width and height, we have a 22 width and a 270 height. So I'm going to go in here and do 220, oops, picked. And then for height, have 270. And padding, I'm going to test the distance between the left side. That'll tell me the best padding measurement that I can for now. So that's 20 pixels, it looks like. And we'll leave off the margin for now. Let's see what this looks like. Oh. I want to reduce the size of those images for now. So I'm going to check size in Sketch of those images. Oops. Those are at 90 and 90. So I'll come back to my CSS for now, and we'll add a declaration for card space image. Okay, so we can see a need for some margin and spacing as well between the cards vertically. So I want to just add that in so that we can see what we're dealing with as we try to re-space these a little bit. So the card itself, we can add margin and We'll look at the space between these here. It's 28 pixels. Refresh. All right. We got to where we can see the cards. There's still some issues with the layout and the content, and it's not matching our designs, but for what we want to deal with today, this should help us a little bit to be able to see those cards. Can everyone see that well enough?
I'm having
with those.
I'm having this a bit of problem, man.
What's that?
I 1, 2, 3, 7, 9. Yeah, I put everything as you have it, but I don't see the shadow of the cards at all. 0, 3, 5, 0. Yeah, and then 34, 41, 47. Couldn't close it. No, still nothing. I'm not getting the boxes.
You're not seeing the shadow around it?
No, not at all. Background. No. Yeah, I see it now.
Okay.
I had it as background. There you go. Good. Okay.
Okay, cool. All right, so we've introduced the concept of a block level element and then an inline level element. What would you say that these cards are? They are sections of the class of card, and which they're inline or block elements based on what you know.
Right now, they're inline.
Why do you say that?
They're all stacking on top of one another, and they all have the same margin and padding around them.
Okay. So I would say that you may have your labels reversed of what you're thinking about in terms of which is inline and which is block. Block elements stack on top of each other and inline flow together. So these I keep clicking on that. The anchor tags are inline as they just go in a row and they would stay as part of text, whereas the block elements are stacked on top of each other. Now there's one other way to display those elements with that display element that I'd like to introduce to you, and that is, we'll call this display inline block. Actually, before I do that, I want to show you what it would look like if we just change these cards to an inline format. Okay, save that. Refresh. What does that look like it's happening because I turn these cards into inline elements? Based on what you see, what's going on with that?
So I see that for every line, it's trying to put an inline, and then it's creating a different box even for the pictures. That's why you see that little
I'm having a
box.
hard time hearing you. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's better.
So I see that it's putting it inline. It's creating a new box for the images too. And then it's just putting like here and then right here, going zigzag all around there, instead of doing a block for the whole thing.
Okay. Let's see. We're going to try. Do a section. Oops. back over here. Do we have something for section already? Because we are dealing with the sections rather than the class, I'm going to try and see if it makes any difference when we do section and then display inline. See if we get the same result as when we do the class. It looks the same. So we are losing our height and width qualities for sure, and it's basically messing up our whole idea of the structure. So we're going to change that to inline block and see what that difference is. So we've looked at block, we've looked at inline, we look at inline block and see what difference that makes. So what are the qualities you're seeing now that we've added this additional display quality?
You're combining both inline and block.
Okay, great. So we're allowing our elements to keep that block quality of height and width and their padding and all of that. But then we're allowing them to flow next to each other. If I expand out a page, they just continue in the line. So they have this wrapping quality to them. What do you note about the height of the cards and their tops?
They're varying heights, or are they varying heights, or are they just out of line?
They look like they're the same height, but they're sort of jetting based on what content is in them. I'm not exactly, to be honest, sure why that's doing it like that, but so this is a tool we can use when we want to change how something is displayed. When we have the browser, it's going to the default characteristics of each of its elements, and most of the time it's a block element, which will take up the full width of the page, and we can add a width to it, which reduces the size of that content, but nothing wraps behind it unless we change from block to inline. So this is just one way to think about how the browser displays the information that we're giving. I've got inline, an inline block, and block elements. So what questions do you have? What can I help clarify? So you have a question in Slido. Do you mind snapping screenshots of the stacks of code you're writing for us to refer to? I can, when I write code, I can try and start copying and pasting it. I think you should have all of this right here. And then in the main CSS, I'll just copy and paste that into Slack for you. Okay, so hopefully that's helpful. And I'll try to keep doing that as I write code. It's good when I am typing, if you can type as well, but I realize that I'll probably go faster than a lot of you can type. So I'll try to keep on top of that as well. All right, great. Any other questions that I can help clarify?
I don't have a question, but more of an observation.
Okay.
So I noticed with the inline block, I noticed the pattern that it aligns to the baseline of the bottom text.
Okay.
So because the heights are like they vary and the vertical positioning they vary, but one thing that's common is the baseline of the emails are aligned.
Yeah.
Oh, that's weird.
It is really unusual. I'm not sure why. But yeah, the text is all aligned. Very interesting. Okay. Any other questions about that? So one thing that we are seeing is that vertical alignment in using the display property is very tricky and can really cause problems. And that's one of the reasons why we are going to try to introduce the Flexbox model to you today, so that you can use something that is much more easy to control from a CSS perspective and from a layout perspective. Okay, so just as a review, a block element will start on a new line, takes up as much width as its parent element will allow. So if it's in the body, then it would take up that full screen. If it's in a div that's smaller in height, then those block elements will just fill up the space within that parent element. We can use height and width to adjust block level elements. We can nest both inline and block elements within each other. So that's what we've got here. Block level elements of sections that have other block elements, but also inline elements within those block elements. Any last questions about that before we jump into more about Flexbox? Okay, we're going to come to look at the Flexbox model. I'm going to drop this link to you in the channel. This site, which is csstricks.com snippets, which is a guide to Flexbox, will have a lot of more information about Flexbox that will be useful to you as you begin to try to practice and learn about Flexbox. But we want to introduce this main basic terminology using this diagram. Flexbox is a way that we can begin to use this property to display elements across the page, both vertically and horizontally. And this outer box is called the Flex container. And then within a Flex container, there will be Flex items. We don't necessarily refer to these Flex items in our code as Flex items, but it's important to understand this concept for when you begin manipulating them and understanding. Flex happens at just a parent and child relationship. So the parent that we assign this Flexbox characteristics to becomes that Flex container, and then all of their first level children become those Flex items. So when we're trying to make those layout decisions, we're referring to those Flex items within that. You can make adjustments on two different axes. So we have a cross axis, which is our vertical axis, and then our main axis, which by default is the horizontal. As we get into it, we'll see that you can actually manipulate where these axes are oriented. But thinking about this box, the upper right is the cross start, and then bottom right is the cross end when you're going vertically, and then going horizontally, you have main start on the left side and main end on the bottom or on the right side. So we'll come back and reference this, but is there any confusion right now that I can help clarify? Okay, so we'll come over here to CodePen. So we'll experiment just as a thinking about this flexbox. So there's the CSS for this. So we'll start with div and what is, if I am going to create this as a flexbox element, then what would we call this div container? Do you recall?
Flex item for now.
This one's going to be the flex container, and then the paragraphs inside of it are going to be called our flex items.
So, so just the div section is the container, and then each line is the flex item.
That's correct.
Okay.
So let's go back here. And sorry. And this is another display property. So when we have a container, then sorry, you can see that the CSS for that will be display flex. So then if we want to create it as an inline flex, then what we're doing is by adding this flex property to the container, then the items within that container become, we can use these codes to just automatically switch the direction, and they flow together better. So let's look at some of the ways that we can then adapt those items within that flex container by giving those qualities that allow us to do that. So we can justify the content, just like content. There are a few different qualities. There's first flex start. So I want to do just flex start is basically the default where they are aligned to the left. And if you do flex end, sorry, I was forgetting my syntax properly. So justify flex end. Let's go back to flex start. By just a single code, we're beginning to be able to push these items different locations within that container. Just for the sake of clarity, we're going to give this background. Okay. So we're seeing this flex box. Now, instead of flex start, we want to center these elements. So there's another code or a property called flex start. And if we want to be able to give spacing between these elements, we can also use a few different ways to do that. There is space between. basically that is taking each of those elements and just spreading them out so that there's equal space between them and no space on either side. There's space around, which is basically providing equal space on either side of each element. And so the elements, their spacing in between the elements is double that of on the ends. Kind of see, so there's basically a margin on each side that's equal. So that's space around, but then you can also space evenly. So it's mathematically spacing both on the ends and in between elements, giving those properties. So that's justify content. So that's dealing with that horizontal axis, or what we refer to as the main axis. And that's giving us flexibility for shaping our elements on that page. Now we can also adjust things across this cross axis, the vertical axis in this image. And that is done through the code align. So we'll go ahead and add align as the property, and we can stretch. Let's see. Let's see. I'm using the wrong element again. I'm drawing a blank right now. Hold on a second. Gabe, I don't know if you have any recollection of what I'm doing wrong here, but I'm trying to make these vertical aligned differences, and I can't remember if it's something I'm doing wrong with the display. What's that?
Oh, it's to align them from top to bottom.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a flex direction column.
Flex. Yeah, that's right. So flex direction. And if I'm dealing with div, I have to give it a height in order for us to deal with the alignment things. So if I'm doing stretch, if I do flex start,
And then for line 5, it's actually align items, I think.
and
They're align items or align content.
it is align items.
None of them did anything to me.
Sorry, I'm gonna actually let us take a break because I'm like having a brain freeze for a minute. And so let's take 5, and then I'll come back and we can jump back in, get some momentum going again. Apologize for that.
Do you want me to stay on, Christian?
Yeah, if you want to, that'd
Yeah.
be great.
I'll stay. Sorry, I was reviewing something earlier. I didn't really know what was
Okay.
going on.
Yeah. Actually, on the timer, so I remember. Do you recall it? I don't remember if okay, I think I figured out what I was doing wrong. Just a matter of not having the height on the box, so I wasn't seeing the movement of changing the alignment.
Yeah, that's something I learned the hard way before.
Yeah.
When dealing with flex direction column, always need a height. Lost hours and hours of headache.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna run grab a drink really quick, and I'll be right back. All right. Thanks for your patience and for the break. Let's get rolling again. So let me share my screen. So the flex attributes I was trying to deal with was the align items, which is the vertical. And I think the issue I was having was because I hadn't created a height for my container. So what I'm doing what I expected to do. It threw me for a loop, and I apologize. But some of the attributes that we can use this align items for is to move to the flex start, which moves things to the top. You can recall that the top and the sides are where the start keyword is for, and then end is where the bottom and the right hand side are. So if we're thinking about trying to move and manipulate elements within this space, the left hand side and the top are the start of the two axes, and the right and bottom are the end. So flex start brings us to the top in alignment, and then flex end bring us to the bottom in our vertical alignment, and then center puts us there. Excuse me. You can also use baseline as a cue here. This one, this example wouldn't make any difference. We do baseline, but we'll show you using baseline in our actual code page in a little bit. So that's alignment, and you can use both of these content at the same time. So we have our justify content, which is the horizontal, and then we have the vertical. So we have aligning to the center, which puts us there in the very middle of that page. Then we have justify content. Right now we have space evenly, and that's where we have space in between. So if we want it on the bottom right of this container, what attributes would you give that?
Flex end.
The bottom right. Okay.
It'll be flex end, and then on the justify content, it would be to the right.
So what would that be? What would I type here?
Would it be right?
It's actually flex end again, because even though I know that this is one of the things that I've found hard to deal with as well in terms of getting my mind around flex, is that we want to say right, we want to say bottom, but because of the nature of the flex box, you can actually rotate the box on itself, in which case the bottom becomes what was the right hand side would become the bottom. And that's what was happening when I was talking with Gabe about putting in that display or the
so basically align items is X, and then justify content is Y.
Justify is, so now I'm confused of what X is horizontal and Y is vertical, right?
Other way.
Okay, so then you're right. So
okay.
align is aligning in the default state. aligning is dealing with this cross, and justification is dealing with the main axis. So that's how we're getting that. All right, so if I want it to be at the bottom of the screen and bottom of the box and spaced evenly, and I can use that space evenly. If I want it to be in the middle of the screen, do center on my alignment and center that. So with flex direction, that was the thing that Gabe had mentioned. Flex direction allows you to do that shifting of the actual container, so that the material in it is, rather than being in a row, you would be able to have it in a column. So thinking of flex direction as being a tilt on axis, on a center axis. So we can change this to column. Now we have item 1, 2, and 3. So this is a very handy tool for our arsenal when we're getting into responsive design, because oftentimes we may have a big space for a desktop where we can have things horizontally oriented, but then we want to have those things stacked on each other as part of a single column in a mobile device, for example. And that's exactly what we see happening with our example design. We have these horizontal rows, but then in our mobile version, it's just these cards stacked on each other. And you can see in the cards themselves, in our design, we have material stacked on each other. But in this,
a material is a substance or mixture of substances that constitutes an object.
Siri. And then some of this content is side by side horizontally within this frame. So that'll be something we'll be thinking about as we get into the layout of these cards. How can we use Flexbox to very easily allow that to flow? So one way we do that is through our flex direction. And we can not only rotate on a plane, but also flip it in terms of what's being displayed. And that's thinking of reversing the order of cards. So if I wanted the 3 to come first and the 1 to come last, I could actually use column reverse. And now it's automatically shifting those boxes around, even though it's kind of a spatial way of thinking about it, but it allows us to manipulate all of these elements within a Flexbox frame, and it gives us a lot of opportunity for layout and answering layout questions.
I'm just thinking here, but in order to separate them, so for example, let's say you want item 1 to be on the top part of the flex and then 2 and 3 on the bottom. Would you just have to separate those by divs and then maybe put a class or something so you can separate, so it can be 2 on one side and 1 on the other?
So are you talking about something like this example of our design where we have some things on one side and some things on another? Is that what you're asking about? So yeah, let's look at how we might accomplish something like that. If we wanted, so let's say we want all of these on our top row of our navigation. Then we want our alignment, our vertical alignment. So actually, let's get rid of this one for now. Flex direction. We will comment that out. In our align items, we will have, what does anybody remember what the code is for moving things to the top in this, in alignment? So flex.
Top, no.
Wasn't the top justify content?
It wasn't top, but it was start. So this is the code good to remember. Top, left, start, and the other one end. So start and end. Okay, so going back to that pen. So we're going to go ahead and do flex start, and that's the default state. And so we can get back to our justify content again. And this one, we're going to just go back to flex start as well. So if we want item 1 to be different, to be on the left side, and item 2 and 3 to be on the right side, we can think conceptually about how that flex box model works. And the first thing we want to do is create different containers for those two items. So let's go ahead and make another div, and we're going to need to go at a class level. We'll call this container. We'll do this class equals container. That way, when we assign this new div, we're not messing around with that. Close the div. Okay. So now you notice what happens is that we have a div, and our items 1, 2, and 3 went back to being block level entries. And that's because with Flexbox, we have a container, and then we have the flex items within that container. And those are just a parent-child relationship. So as soon as I added this div, then this became this was still the container, but this class became the item. And now everything within that item is not affected by the flex properties at all. And it just goes back to their default state. So if we want another div, and let's take these items and add them to the second div. Can you kind of see what's going on there? We have 2 block elements, or 2 flex container elements that are both aligned to the top, and they are aligned to the left side to justify content. So what could I use to spread these 2 items that are now the flex children, or the flex items in that flex box, to send them to the opposite sides? We have justify content, maybe space between. We have those items. So that becomes a way we can deal with that. But now we have a 2 block level items within that. But we can actually create we'll call this right side, just for the sake of having fun. Oops. And something has happened. Okay. I don't know why it went blank there for a second, but we now have another Flex container within a Flex container. So that allows us to deal with this div as a container, and it has Flex elements, Flex items within it. And we can start manipulating those through our attributes. So because the default display makes them, those items, to be in line with each other, then we've basically done the thing that we were looking to do. And if I wanted to change that layout within that container, I can then add some justify and make this space between again. And that's actually, for this one, give it a background color as well. So we can see.
Yeah, I think we just need to add a width on for the right side.
Yeah. So
we can see the spacing.
this is a good example of something that will help you as you start working with Flexbox, is that it's really not, it's I guess filling the content to the width of the content, and basically building that box around that. So in order to start having that spatial flexibility, you need to assign height and width, and then work within that height and width with those flex items. So if we give it a width of 500 pixels, the color that's better, and we can give it a height of 100%. We can do the things that we want to within that space as well, of justifying the content. We can change it to something like space around. Yeah. Okay, so we've done some experimentation with Flexbox, trying to show you a few of those commands that you can provide it in order for it to be able to represent the content. What questions do you have?
I just don't get the space around, sorry.
Okay, so space around is basically taking each of these items and adding an equal amount of space on each side of those items, on either side, that fills up the total space. So actually, let's give those P's.
Because for some reason I expected it to still be stacked on top of each other, unless I missed something. And then still, they can still have like equal distance around each other, but they'll be stacked.
Okay, so yeah, good question. These are, because they are, the default is to place these as essentially inline flex items, so they're not stacked on top of each other. We can create, let's see, the code is flex direction, and the options are row. So flex direction right now, it's in a row, and we can make it into a column to have them stack on top of each other. But the default behavior when you just create flex items is that they are in a row. And so the space around is giving them that. Actually, let me create box background. So I'm going to comment this out for a minute. So with space around, we basically got, with this flex model, 2 items that are flexed, and their container is this teal area. So you can kind of see, oops, that on the space in between these two is equal to basically the addition of this and this on the left and right sides of those. So essentially we have an exact even margin on each side, and then it looks like more space between them because it's the combination of those 2 margins. And that's what's happening. Am I answering the question that you're asking? Is that becoming more clear?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. And you'll notice that if we go back to that column mode, we're still doing the justify content, but it's giving us vertical spacing. So that's sort of helping you see that when we shift to column mode, we're actually shifting that whole box. And so now our axis that we were talking about here, the main axis that normally we'll do our justify content, is still doing the justify content, but it's a vertical axis now because we're shifting that whole container on its side. So we can do that row reverse or column reverse as well to get things in a different order. So let's do column reverse again. Now we have item 3 on top of item 2. We can do row reverse. Oops, row. Now 3 is in front of item 2, but it's still in a row horizontally. And then we can just do straight row, and it will be item 2 and then item 3. We kind of getting the gist of how this works. You can see as you adjust the size of your browser that the side that I've given a width to stays constant. The other side flexes to fill the space that's available. Okay, let me look at our Slido here and see if anyone's got any questions up. What other questions can I help you clarify? Okay, so just going over a few of these properties, and so that the container is, we have container, we have items, and these are always just going to be a parent and child relationship. Anything inside of those children elements, those items, the flex items, are not going to be affected by the flex unless we create a new flex item. So there's another property we want to talk a little bit about, and that is flex wrap. And as it says here, by default, flex items will all try to fit onto one line. you can change that and allow the items to wrap if necessary. So you have those options of no wrap, wrap, and wrap reverse. So let's look at that in our pen. We're going to add a few items. And we are going to comment this out for a second. And then we're going to give it a flex wrap. Let's say wrap. Let's see if this will show us wrapping. Let's see if we need to add. Okay, just needed some additional content there. So because we're filling up more of that space with that container, that item, then it'll show, it allows it to wrap. Let me just add some more content here. There's another attribute of that wrap reverse. Which actually puts things in the reverse order, similar to like our other adjustments. When we do row reverse or a column reverse, wrap reverse. If we say no wrap, you see no wrap. And it just smashes things together. We can prevent that behavior, but that's the default behavior as well. I'll take that off. Okay. Oops. Any questions come up as we thought about this? Okay, I have a code pen to share with you, and we're going to have you work on this independently and try to come up with a solution. Share it with you. I'll share the link in the channel. All right, go ahead and go to that pen, and we have 5 challenges in this code pen. And what I want to do is you go through in those challenges and see, using Flexbox, for example, the first challenge is using Flexbox, make all the boxes line up beside each other. So go ahead and feel free to use this reference to remind yourself of what some of those codes are that you enter in, those attributes, in order to use Flexbox to make these shapes. So let's just go ahead. I'm going to set the timer for, let's go with about 7 minutes. See if everybody can get through all 5 challenges in 7 minutes, and then we can go through them together. And if you like struggle, you can see that I struggled with this, trying to remember some of the things that I had learned and remind myself of these things. It's okay to go back and reference things that you've looked at before in order to be able to help build that muscle memory of being able to use these things. And just give it your best shot. Okay, we have about 2.5 minutes. How's everybody doing?
On the third one.
Yeah. Great. We can take more time if that's helpful for folks, but let's see where we're at in a couple of minutes.
I don't know if I'm crazy, but challenge 4 and 5 are the same, right?
I'll have to look at that.
Yeah, they're the same. Using flexbox, make all of the boxes go in a row with equal space around them. And challenge 5, using flexbox, make all of the boxes go in a row with equal space. Oh, between. Got it. Okay. Yeah.
They are different. Those are around and between are the keywords there. Okay. Do you want a little bit more time? Okay. So what I'd like to do is go through these together and have some of the class members walk us through them. So we've heard from Ivan and Serena. Maybe Brandon, do you want to give one of these a shot? Maybe challenge 1. Talk me through how you would do that.
Yeah, sure. So using challenge 1, you said?
Yeah, challenge 1.
Using flexbox, make all of the boxes line up beside each other. So you would have to line up all of them on the top row, I assume?
Right, yeah.
Okay. So is there justify content row?
Okay, what declaration of CSS would I start with?
So it would be hashtag challenge 1.
Okay.
And then curly brackets. Justify content row, if I'm thinking correctly.
See if that does anything. So row isn't one of the
Row isn't justify content,
commands
right?
that you can do for justify.
Yeah, I'm still trying to
Yeah.
memorize all of them.
Yeah.
Let me pull up a list real quick.
It's okay. Does anyone else want to help him out?
I mean,
flex
always
direction
kind
row.
of declare that the display is flex.
Oh yeah, you have to do also display colon.
Yeah, you gotta declare a flex. So a flex, so the flex things actually work.
Okay, so it has to be display, flex, and then flex direction row. Okay, good.
And then you just copy and paste it for the challenge 2 and challenge 3. Oh, never mind. Challenge 2 is different. Sorry.
That's all right. Okay, let's go to challenge 2. Christina, do you want to walk us through this one?
Sorry, I didn't realize I was still muted.
Oh, okay.
I've been talking this whole time. So what I did was I put I did a display flex.
Okay.
And then I did the flex direction row reverse.
Oh, reverse. Okay.
Great.
So that. So basically, with row flex direction row reverse, we're flopping the whole thing, and that's why it ends up on the other side of the screen. And so then we could, if we wanted to do our justify content, and we can go to justify content, flex end. And because we flipped it around, then end is on the left instead of the right. If that makes sense. So anyway, that wasn't part of the challenge, but I just thought I'd point that out as a way to think about the flex model. Awesome, thanks, Christina.
Yeah.
Let's see, JP, do you want to walk us through challenge 3? Were you able to get that one done? JP, are you around?
I think he said that he's getting new internet installed, so he had to hop off.
Oh, okay. All right, let's see, who else we have? Nora, did you get something yet that you can share with us?
I didn't get this far, so I have no idea.
Okay. No worries. So we've got the challenge of make all of the boxes go in a column in the reverse direction. So we have the flex direction to make something into a column, right? Or we can use that to make it a column. So flex direction, again, using the same declaration. Then from flex direction, we can do column reverse. Basically flipping that on its end so that rather than green first to red, it's going red first to green. Okay, who has got challenge 4 done? I'd like to share.
I did.
Okay, Ivan, do you want to share it?
Yeah. What I do with that one was justify content space around.
Sorry, can you say that again? I couldn't hear again.
I use justify content space around.
Okay, justify content space around.
With the display
Wait,
flex.
yeah, we got to get the display right. Okay, so that means that we have now have content that's spaced around them. That means that on either side of each object, you have the same amount of space, but because some objects are butting into each other, those ones have double the space of on the sides that don't have something on them. So that's what space around does for us. And the last one, someone else have challenge 5? Did anyone get that far?
I got it.
Okay. You want to share that one with us, Christina?
Sure. I did display flex and justify content space between.
All right. So now the objects have space just between them, and they're ignoring the sides that don't have neighboring content elements. So it's nice that some of these terms that we're using are semantically meaningful. We kind of see column reverse, row reverse, and these are, it makes it easier to understand once we get the whole like visualizing of that content to make sense. All right, let's take another break. We'll just do a quick 5-minute break, and then we will come back and start applying some of these principles to our actual design and give us a chance to see it in practice. So another 5-minute break. Oops. And we will come back. Okay, we are back. We are on our employee dashboard, and we want to begin trying to apply some of these Flexbox concepts to our layout here. So I'm going to remove this display inline block declaration, and we're coming back to this design. So if we look at our sketch file, we know that we're going to want to do some layout things here with this content. Let's start with this navigation. What do you think would be our container for the applying Flexbox to this design? When we have our current code, we have employee and then the navigation links and then this individual's picture, the avatar. And our HTML is here. We have our body, header, nav, and main. Which of those elements would you make into a Flexbox container to do some Flexbox layout with that section?
Navigation.
Okay.
Nav.
Yeah, so this element here.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. We've assigned nav A some elements, but it doesn't look good. We have nav doing anything specifically. So let's go ahead and do a nav. And then the property is display and it's flex. We hit save. And what do we anticipate will happen with all of these? Any guesses? Think in your mind. I've just created nav as a Flexbox container. And its children are the flex items. So an H1 and 3A tags and an image tag. So just think in your head, as soon as I hit refresh, what do you think is going to happen? Oops, haven't second yet. Refresh.
It should start aligning them by the order that you have on the HTML.
Okay, we refreshed and that's exactly what it did. Now you can see here we have the H1 and then we have the 3 anchor tags and then we have that image. They're just in a flex row and ready for us to play with them. So this gives us actually an opportunity to demonstrate some of those other qualities that I had mentioned that didn't really show up, and that is in the alignment. We have the ability to align where's the code? It should be baseline. Align items baseline is an example. Let's see, align items baseline. Any guess of what that's going to do?
They should align at the baseline of the font.
Okay.
Instead of like employee here being down and then the other ones being up.
Okay, so let's see what that looks like. So that's right. The font is aligning at the bottom, and then the image is also aligning there at the bottom. You have the option to align center as well. And when we align center, that's putting everything aligned. And you can see that because the fonts are different sizes, different line heights, then that baseline looks a little bit funny next to each other. So we have a few different things that we can play with in order to get those aligned. So we're going to go ahead and make that baseline. So based on what we had done earlier, what else might we do in order to make this look like a little bit closer from a layout perspective to our sketch design? So right now we have the employee H1 over on the left and the navigation items and the avatar on the right.
Should we separate the divs within navigation?
Okay. Yeah, we're going to
In
want
the
to do that.
HTML?
That's great. In the HTML, yeah. So we're going to create a div for the H1. See, yeah. And then another div for the other elements. Those. Now we have those also aligned on the baseline there. So we want that image to be smaller. So I'm going to go ahead and do nav image width 40 pixels, height 40 pixels. Okay, that's more like it. Now we've got our divs, and our divs are now the child elements of that nav code. So they become the flex items. And right now they're aligned to the, what did we call the left-hand side? Does anyone remember? It's not the left.
The main? No.
Not the main, but it's the start.
Start, yeah.
So when we think about Flexbox with start and end, that'll be really good to get that ingrained in our minds. So we can do that. And then what is the CSS that we would want to add to space those out the way that we were thinking? If we do justify, because we're thinking from on that horizontal axis currently, justify content. Let's do space around. See what that looks like. Is that getting at what we want? It's closer, but maybe if we do space between, that's going to be a little better. Now we have elements shifted across to those. And maybe we want to do some additional flexing on this div. So we wanted to give this div a class equals nav links. We're going to make that another flex container. Excuse me. Class nav display. And right now, in this area, I'm going to want that box to be approximately that space, and these are probably good. We're going to want to keep that distance pretty uniform, however we flex the width of this page. So I'm going to make that box to be a width of, I'm going to go with 408. So make that. And then I want to be evenly spaced in between. So I'm going to go space evenly with my justify content. Space evenly. And let's see what that looks like in our browser. Okay, and we've got pretty close to what our design looks like. We're not dealing with the background necessarily yet and that drop shadow, but our spacing looks pretty close, except for this avatar guy. He's pretty low. Can you remember one of the things that we might?
Justify content center.
Okay, let's look at what that looks like. But we've already got to justify content, so it would be align content center. Let's see what that looks like. Did we do that right? Align items, that's what it is. Align items. Apologize for the mistype. So then, yeah, align items gives us that centering. Let's compare it to what our design looks like. Looks pretty close. So that's a way that we would use Flexbox to start to flesh out the layout of our items. And we can start working cards in the same way, creating a Flexbox container in each one of those items becomes an element that then flexes and flows according to what we want it to do. We're getting close to the top of the hour, so let me review today's assignment, and then I can answer some additional questions. Okay. Just waiting for this to refresh. This is taking much longer than usual. Okay. All right. Again, there are two code pens. Oh, sorry. There's one code pen, and then we have a Flexbox practice, and I want you to read through that document that we were referencing to familiarize yourself more with Flexbox. And then there is a flexboxfroggy.com game. Flexbox Froggy is just a playful way to practice the Flexbox skills, and it allows you to move these virtual frogs using Flexbox to place them on lily pads. So it's kind of a fun way to practice these skills. So we'll go through, complete that game and take a screenshot of the final screen and then add it to your Google Doc. So complete that code pen and then do that game and then submit that. And that is the assignment for today. What questions can I answer right now?
I have some concerns about the sprint for tomorrow.
That was me. I was just
I'm like, okay. Time. It's yeah. It's time. So like yesterday, for example, I was testing myself to see how long it took me to complete the 2 code pens. And for me personally, all in all, it took approximately 4 to 5 hours to get it done correctly. and that's way over
Okay.
our sprint.
Yeah. I feel like our sprint challenge for tomorrow is not inordinately big in terms of the scope of what all you have to create, although it's covering the material. So I don't think it'll be a huge lift from a time perspective, but I could be wrong because we're just feeding out these assignments, and we've only been through this a few times. So
It was just more like a.
Get too stressed out of it. Like if you're getting to the point, yeah. Sorry, what was that?
That's okay. It was just more like I just wanted to let you know where I am in terms of being able to accomplish certain tasks in a certain amount of time. So.
Okay. Good. So if you get into it and like you're seeing like a big delay, let's reach out to your TLs and let's talk about it and see what we need to do if there is that issue. But I don't want it to be like a huge weight on your shoulders right now. So we practice some of these things, and I feel like it'll be reasonable within that. But definitely, let's keep that communication open so we can alleviate any concerns at that point.
Okay, thanks.
All right, any other questions? Anything in the Slido? Nothing there. We will call it a day, and if anyone is wanting to do the Halloween costume contest, I don't know if you've heard about that, but we will just stay on this channel and you can go and then come back. We'll come back. I'll just put on a timer up on the channel for 5 minutes. And once those 5 minutes are up, whoever's here will be part of the contest, and whoever is not doesn't have to be part of the contest. The odds of winning are pretty good in an 8-person cohort, especially if other people don't participate.
And you wear a flux box. That's scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, $75 Amazon gift card to the first one, 45 to the second.
Vivian would be all about that right now.
I think like officially the contest starts at like 11:05 and goes to 11:15. So go put on some costumes real quick.
I have nothing.
A background, a theme, and a costume.
Oh man.
Think fast.
Festive. All right, everybody. Thanks for the class today, and we will see some of you in 5 minutes.
All right.
Cheerio.